Very warm welcome. Lovely to have so many of you here this evening for this event on food and well-being, or perhaps more widely, lifestyle, nutrition, and every aspect of our lives and well-being, with our very special guest, Dr. Rupy Aujla. Rupy, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Mark. I'm super chuffed to be here as well.
Well, you've done such wonderful work, and we had a great event together on mental health and food a couple of years ago, when we could still do those big events in big halls all together. And of course, the world has changed a lot since then. So I'll just briefly introduce you and the plan for this evening to the audience. And then I'm really looking forward to our conversation on this vitally important topic at what's a really, really crucial time for all of us in terms of our well-being and the well-being of our society as a whole. So Rupy, obviously you're a doctor, a GP. I know you work also in A&E a lot, and you've done such a lot of leading work in nutrition and lifestyle and the practical things we can do. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that and hearing more of your story. From the audience perspective, thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many hundreds and going on for thousands of you joining us, and all these lovely messages on the chat from all around the world. Thank you for being here, folks. We always love to see the chat during these sessions, so please do keep your comments coming in. We'll try and bring comments in as we go along, and once Rupy and I've had a conversation together on a whole range of topics I hope you'll find interesting, we're also really looking forward to your questions, so please do jump on the Q&A function on Zoom and ask some questions for Rupy, either things on your mind or responses to what you've heard. We won't have a chance to answer all of them, but I'm looking forward to getting lots of those answered by Rupy. He's a real expert in answering tricky questions and interesting questions on this topic. So that's it really. We're starting now. We'll have about half an hour of chat and then almost half an hour of Q&A, and we'll be wrapping up at 8 p.m. UK time. But I know there's people here from all around the world, and I'm saying hello from sunny California, which is nice to hear. So Rupy, welcome. I wanted to start really, as well as hearing a bit about your background, I mean, maybe you could say a bit about the sort of work you're doing. But this must have been a crazy time, these last 6-9 months, for people in the world of healthcare. You know, you've got experience as a GP, you're working with people who are dealing with, you know, lifestyle issues, and you're in the kind of A&E experience of the whole COVID frontline. How has it been from your perspective?
Yeah, well Mark, it's interesting is definitely the word. It's been challenging at times. So just to give the audience an idea of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm trained as a general practitioner. I've been working as a doctor now for well over 10 years. I also work in A&E. I used to work in Australia for a couple of years, and I did A&E there, and I have since started doing more A&E in the UK as well. But during lockdown, particularly during the worst months, I was essentially redeployed to ITU. I've got some ITU experience. But interestingly, my role was non-clinical. So I was part of a senior-led team of doctors where we would actually be informing the patients' families and relatives of what their clinical condition was on a daily basis. Obviously, during that time and even now, patients' relatives couldn't visit them in ICU. And a lot of them were ventilated as well. So we had to really be the conduit between the ITU team and the families. So it was a very interesting experience, having to break bad news pretty much every day and inform families. It was very personal. And A&E as well was another interesting experience, because we actually saw a massive reduction in people presenting to A&E for fear of obviously contracting the condition, which is a legitimate fear. And we only saw the really serious cases coming through. So all in all, it's definitely been challenging, but one of the biggest things and the biggest takeaways that I found is that people are a lot more attuned to how vulnerable we are as humans. And I think a lot more people are thinking about lifestyle in a different light. There's an immediacy effect that the pandemic has brought upon ourselves. And I think we all know that we can improve our lifestyles through simple tactics. And the things that I've been talking about for the last 5 years are really coming to the forefront, which is good to see, despite obviously the tragedy.
Thanks, Rupy. And just conscious of the global audience, we've already had Shelley saying on the chat, is A&E what we call the ER in North America, the emergency room?
Yeah.
I guess that's the same thing, isn't it?
Yes,
Accident and
yeah.
emergency, folks, if you're not familiar with the A&E terminology. But Rupy, that's a nice link into what you've been doing for years, because I think it's always been really relevant, and it's now perhaps even more relevant given the links between some of our lifestyle and pre-existing health conditions and our propensity to COVID and so on. And the thing I've seen you say time and again is that sort of lifestyle is a form of medicine, if you like. And in fact, we, in many ways, in our health services, we're dealing more with, acute illness rather than promoting health as a way of life. Can you say a bit more about lifestyle as medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the core tenets of what I talk about, and since I started the Doctor's Kitchen, is to remind people of the beauty of food and the medicinal effects of eating well. I create recipes and I talk about the clinical research behind the ingredients I use in an effort to inspire everybody, including my colleagues, actually, about just how impactful food can be. One of the things that I've been doing over the last couple of years now is actually studying a master's in nutritional medicine at University of Surrey, really to give myself even more gravitas and just that layer of credibility, and also the time and space to investigate these associations in a lot more detail. And when it comes to lifestyle and food as medicine, it's not a replacement for obviously the pills and pharmaceuticals and all the other things, but to limit medicine as just the prescription of tablets or the intervention with surgery is exceptionally naive. And I think it really undermines the breadth of what medicine encompasses. To me, medicine can be practiced when I advise people about diet, but also, having an empathic conversation, the encouragement about sleep and ways of self-care. And I think we can all be practicing medicine ourselves when it comes to lifestyle measures. So, the simple tenets of what I discuss isn't to follow a dietary dogma. It isn't to all go low carb or vegan, or to, all get 8 hours of sleep every night, even though I think that'd be very beneficial for a lot of people. It's to be a lot more intuitive about what works for you and give everyone the foundations and the tools by which they can look after themselves.
Yes, and I think that's why it's so empowering, this idea that we have more agency, more ability to shape our health and our well-being and our mental health than perhaps we ever realized before. And in a moment, I'd love to come to some of the wider lifestyle questions beyond just nutrition, around sleep and stress and purpose and meaning in life, and some of the amazing topics you cover in your Doctor's Kitchen podcast, which I really enjoy. But let's start with sort of the basics around food, because of course your Doctor's Kitchen has really become a phenomenon, and you do these lovely sort of whole food, healthy recipes, and it's obviously engaged a huge audience. But maybe you could take us through some of your core principles when it comes to food and well-being. What comes top of mind for you as a priority?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about 5 main principles of healthy eating. So it's mostly plants. A lot of the evidence demonstrates that the more plants we have in our diet, the better. So that doesn't mean everyone needs to go vegan or vegetarian, but certainly we need a lot more plant material in our diet. Colors, because they represent the different micronutrients, including phytonutrients that we get from diverse vegetables, whether it be aubergine, tomatoes, courgettes, even the simple herbs, nuts and seeds. Those also contain really important chemicals that you can't just supplement with. Fiber is the biggest thing that's lacking in our diet. Most people, when they think about healthy eating, they think I've got to get more protein in my diet. We're usually protein replete, but we need to get a lot more fiber in our diet. We do that with a lot more plants as well, and lentils, beans, pulses, that sort of thing. Also eating whole. So a lot of people are kind of confused about refined foods and, whether they should be on a raw diet. In reality, you want to get somewhere on the spectrum from what this is being a raw food here and refined sugar here. You want to get somewhere in the middle, because some degree of processing actually increases the bioavailability of the nutrition that you find within food. So, cooking, steaming, lightly boiling, those sorts of things to make sure you're not overcooking your food. That's what we mean by eating whole. And then the other thing I think that is super important, particularly over the last decade or so, is quality fats. We've been demonizing fats for the last 40 years, and I don't really want to go into the reasons as to why and what kind of poor nutritional science led to those ingrained beliefs. But quality fats that we get from nuts, seeds, even cold pressed oils are really beneficial for us. They contain a myriad of different fats, monounsaturated and saturated, which are just as important, but also they contain things like omega-3, vitamin E, resolvins. These are all sorts of chemicals that manage inflammation in our bodies, and inflammation is a really broad topic. The other thing that I do like to talk about, and there is a lot more interest as well in this whole field of defining your eating windows, is eating in time. And so that's eating in a rough window of around 10 to 11 hours. Evolutionarily, which is the kind of perspective I always like to take when talking about how we should be eating, we wouldn't have had this continuous access to food, and we wouldn't have had this relationship where it's not acceptable to feel hunger. Now, obviously, bearing in mind, eating disorders are a big topic, and we shouldn't be dismissive of that. But most people can reestablish their relationship with hunger slightly. Just eating in a 10 to 11 hour window over a 24-hour period can actually have some metabolic benefits. And I know for patients that I've been coaching through this process, it's been really impactful for them as well. So those are the core principles that I like to talk about: colors, whole, largely plants, quality fats, fiber, and eating in time. And those sort of principles run through all the recipes that I create online, in the books, and in the next book coming out next year as well.
That's super helpful. And what I love about it is it's not very prescriptive. It's not going down one particular dogmatic way. It's just sort of going for a balanced sort of common sense approach. But I particularly like the fact you mentioned the sort of time restricted feeding, which is called various different things. I've been practicing that myself on and off for a few years, and found it really life-changing in terms of just generally managing mood and energy and so on. And so for those who don't necessarily understand that concept, it would be like stopping eating earlier in the evening and maybe beginning eating later on the next day. So you might do all of your consuming your food between, say, 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. or something like that, and then outside of that time, leave your body a chance to rest and recover and go into sort of non-consumption mode. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. There are a number of benefits of making sure that you're not eating too late. It has less disruption in your sleep mechanisms. It allows your gut to have a good rest. It means that you're not constantly diverting blood supply towards your gut, which is a huge organ if you think about the length of your digestive tract as well. So these are all some core benefits. And, I do practice an intuitive, gentle fast every now and then. So sometimes I will skip breakfast and I won't eat until lunchtime, but I won't be forcing myself to do that. And I think you have to be quite intuitive as to whether, this is actually going to be useful for you as an individual. For me, that works particularly well. Especially if I'm working a shift and it's an early one and I don't really feel like eating at 6 a.m. I'm not going to force something down myself. I'm just going to have plenty of hydration and then break my fast at lunch.
And you mentioned the gut there, and of course there's been all this fascinating stuff about the microbiome and how our gut health isn't just to do with our digestion. It affects our immunity, affects even our mood and some of the neurotransmitters and so on. Would you like to say a little bit about the gut? Because it seems to be a really emerging area, but one that I think few of us really have got a handle on what it means and how sort of vast it is in some ways. We're more living creatures in our guts, and it seems to be sort of bits of us in our body, if you like.
Well, quite frankly, I don't think anyone's got a full handle on it, even those who are researching it day in, day out, because it's just such a vast science that is constantly evolving. To put it in simple terms, your gut microbiota is this collection of microbes that include fungi, viruses, believe it or not, nematodes, as well as bacteria that are absolutely inseparable from health. So they digest food for us, yes, but they also release micronutrients from food. They allow the gut lining to be properly maintained. It also is responsible, like you said, to release neurotransmitters, things like serotonin. The serotonin can have multiple effects, and most people know it as the happy hormone, but it can indirectly affect your mood by having an impact on the vagus nerve, stimulating or causing less motility of your gut as well, which demonstrates a signal to your brain that everything's going okay in our gut, there's no need to worry. Serotonin is also postulated to have a direct impact on the brain via the blood-brain barrier, which we used to think was completely immunodistinct, i.e., wasn't penetrable by inflammation systemically in our bodies, but we know now that it can actually cross. And some people believe that, serotonin that is produced in the gut can have that impact on your mood as well. There are a number of links with the gut-brain axis and the gut cytokine axis as well. So that's where inflammation that can be modulated by good gut health can actually have improvements in people's mood as well. Fascinating studies looking at diet as an intervention with mental health conditions. There was a big, not a big one, it was a small trial called the SMILES trial. It was conducted back in 2016 by Australian colleagues. I actually did a podcast with one of the lead researchers, Felice Jacka. And since then, they've really coined this term called nutritional psychiatry, which has penetrated mainstream psychiatry. To the point where a lot more traditionally skeptical doctors, as we all should be, are now sitting up and actually thinking about, okay, how do I introduce simple dietary measures into my patients to give them the best chance at getting better, to lessen their reliance on pharmaceuticals, or even remove pharmaceuticals from their provisions in its entirety. That was demonstrated by the study that I just talked about. So there's a lot of emerging evidence. I think that getting the basics right is the first thing, because I think we're in a time where the internet is a powerful educator, which can be misinforming as well. It can be informing. And a lot of people are trying to look for a quick fix, whether it be a supplement, a probiotic pill. If you just take this, it will improve your mood, sort of thing. You need to get the basics right. And the basics I've just talked about with the principles of healthy eating. But when it comes to the gut, it's making sure you're giving it a rest. It's making sure that you're not having irritants to it, like high salt, high sugar, convenience items, and irritants in the form of additives and preservatives that can actually damage the lining of the gut. It's also about getting adequate amounts of fiber and diversity of plants in your diet, because that is one of the single best strategies of improving gut health.
And more broadly, while we're still on food, obviously, in the context of the current crisis, we've seen that people with certain underlying health conditions are more, not only struggling with that generally, are more at risk of COVID and other sort of forms of virus. We hear about sort of obesity, we hear about type 2 diabetes in particular. Both of those have obviously got very strong potential links to our diet and nutrition. What are some of the benefits that we might expect people to see if they could switch to perhaps some of what you're recommending away from the rather crazy sort of convenience food that we're marketed to? Because it feels to me that big food and a lot of the companies are in a position of marketing and selling us stuff that is completely at odds with everything you've just described. So how, what are some of the benefits, and how can we encourage more of us to adopt this way of eating?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and this is why, like, I try and take an approach that isn't blaming of people and patients, because we live in a food environment that is exceptionally obesogenic as it is psychogenic. What I mean by psychogenic is that we're lonely, we're addicted to our phones, we have a lot of distractions that are not really good for our mental well-being. But we also live in a time where there's a handful of companies that control 80% of the foods that are provided to us in the form of ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are those that you can see in the majority of what you see in a supermarket, wherever you might be in the world, quite frankly. The prepackaged items, the items where you look at the ingredients, you can't really recognize all of them. But even the items that are marketed as healthy, with gluten-free, soy-free, GMO-free, all these different things, they can be just as processed as some of the unhealthier items on the shelves as well. So really, we want to get people from relying on products with labels and things that are touted as healthy, and move them more towards an intuitive way of eating that appreciates the complexity of natural whole foods and encourages people to be exploratory and kitchen confident, which is why I always go back to basics and I try and get people cooking from scratch. It's one of the reasons why I started the nonprofit Culinary Medicine UK, which is here to educate medical students on how to cook, so they can not only advise patients in the future and refer appropriately to nutrition specialists, but also practice self-care. Because and I'm not too sure if there are many medical professionals listening to this or watching the audience around the world, but we are the most unhealthy. We are a higher risk of the things that you mentioned: obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular problems. We are not pillars of health to look up to, and actually we need to practice self-care. as I had to do at a very young age, and only then can you actually start looking after other people. And to your point, sorry to go on a bit, but obesity and type 2 diabetes, the fact that these comorbidities have an association with the virus in that you're more likely to have a worse outcome, but B, are potentially preventable in a lot of cases. It's now waking a lot of people up to the realization that, you know what, I actually have a lot more control, and I can't rely on medicine alone. We're not going to get a miraculous vaccine anytime soon. We're not going to get a miraculous treatment anytime soon. We have to really focus on self-care as the foundation before relying on, you know, anything external to what's in our control.
I think that's really important, and it takes me to this slightly broader topic of, we talked a bit on food and nutrition particularly, but as you cover in all of your wonderful Doctor's Kitchen conversations now, this is part of a broader conversation, which is very much what we're focused on with Action for Happiness as well, around well-being in the broader sense. So as well as nutrition, what are some of your pillars, if you like, for thriving in life? You know, whether that's your sleep or the way you manage stress. What are some of the things that are top of your mind beyond the nutrition and the food we eat?
Yeah, I mean, so the one that I like to start off with is the one that I struggle with the most, and that's sleep. And I think, you know, sleep is, to quote Matthew Walker, really the sort of foundation by which every health habit should be built upon. It's really, you know, something that has demonstrable impacts on immune health, weight regulation, sugar control. There's a whole bunch of research studies looking at just how impactful sleep can be, and how, if you don't get enough sleep, it can be detrimental. That being said, it's very hard for me to sit at my doctor's desk and say to someone, you know, you need to get some more sleep. It's not as easy as popping a pill, and it's not as easy as even preparing a good meal for yourself. There's so many strategies that we need to try and encourage people to, and actually be a little bit more compassionate with themselves about. The three key things that I do like to talk about with patients when it comes to improving sleep is try to get a mindfulness routine in the evenings. So whether that be breath work or meditation, using an app, or using, if you're that way inclined to actually just meditate on your own, if you can. I'm not as good as I should be. I would definitely try and encourage one of those. A second thing is not eating too late, and eating too late can really disrupt the quality of your sleep as well. And the third thing in our day and age, particularly during the lockdown, I mean, I was using my phone way too much. It's using electronics, including laptops that I'm looking right into right now, too late at night. And I give myself a 2 to 3 hour window. Those are the core sleep principles that I always build in. And then on top of that, there are supplementation, there is pharmaceuticals that are very, very late stage. And there's also cognitive behavioral therapies that doctors are quite versed in trying to refer to. So I would say sleep is definitely number one. Obviously exercise and yes, mindfulness is a strategy. But I think the other thing that probably doesn't get talked about as much is community and sense of purpose. And the two go hand in hand. And I think I'm right in saying that even though lockdown and COVID was an incredibly tragic time for a lot of people, and you know the conversations I was having with patients' families on a daily basis was always telling of that. It really did allow everyone to feel that sense of community and that sense of purpose. I remember I was walking around with my dog and meeting the neighbours, and I would never, and it's a very British thing to do, but I'd never really go up to someone and have that sort of conversation with them one-to-one. But during the lockdown, it was, you know, at a safe distance, obviously. I was encouraged to reach out and, you know, see if they were doing well, or if they needed help, or if they needed, you know, provisions or anything like that. And I felt that a lot. And I think everyone needs that sense of purpose. It doesn't need to be a grandiose idea. It can be as simple as, you know, being the best father, being the best parent, being, you know, the best you can for your company, or whatever you want to achieve in life. It doesn't need to be a grandiose idea like scaling a huge company, but having that vision is very, very important, and people need to be aware of that.
I think that's so powerful. And although the media loves to focus right now on some of the doom and gloom and the sort of people who are maybe misbehaving or not being very sort of kind of considerate. Actually, I think the main thing I've seen during this COVID period is just an enormous amount of solidarity, togetherness, people uniting in their communities, looking out for each other. And that is an instinct we all have. And I think you're absolutely right to highlight it. So that's community and purpose, sleep, nutrition, exercise, all fundamental. In a moment, I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the personal practices you do yourself. I'm sure the community here will be interested in some of that. But before we get to that, I think that the thing we often wrestle with Action for Happiness in trying to help and support people is that knowing the theory of this stuff is all well and good, but putting it into practice, taking action is really hard. Like, we are creatures of habit. We have certain ways of eating, of sleeping, of exercising or not, and breaking habits. You know, we all know the New Year's resolution, you know, good intentions that rapidly disappear. So how can we start building habits that last? So finding one or two little nuggets from what you said tonight that we can actually turn into something that is life-changing and lasting.
Yeah, I think to start off with, I just want to say that during my increased clinical duties and stuff, you know, I usually work part-time, 2 to 3 days a week, but during the main period of lockdown, it was around 5 to 6 days a week and doing double shifts and all the rest of it. I really slipped off the wagon. Like, you know, I put on a ton of weight. I wouldn't say a ton, but like as a percentage of my normal weight, it went right up. And I know why that was. It was because I wasn't sleeping well. It was because I was constantly snacking on all the wonderful gifts that patients, families were bringing in for the staff and stuff. And obviously it was the unhealthy stuff because it's comfort food, and I understand that. But despite me knowing all these things, it was hard for me to stick to, you know, what I understand to be healthy and what I know is better for me. I've obviously, you know, put myself in a massive health kick at the moment, and I'm feeling a lot better for it. But it's a very, very important point. How do you make these things stick? And I like to, there's a book we were speaking about before, James Clear, Atomic Habits. I think it's a fantastic book. It's all about making sure that you don't post 0 days, and you have a minimum requirement every single day that you stick onto an existing habit. So whether it's brushing your teeth, or whether it's walking the dog, or whether it's your morning coffee in the morning, sticking a habit onto that is very, very effective. And the thing that I find that's really effective for patients is if they want to start an exercise routine, is if I say, what is the minimum amount of exercise that you could do every single day for 7 days? And they always start off high. They're like 20 minutes. I'm like, you sure you can do 20 minutes? What if it was raining? What if, you know, you couldn't get to the gym or whatever? Like, okay, fine, 10 minutes. All right, you sure you can do 10 minutes? I get them down to 60 seconds. If you can do exercise 60 seconds every single day, just promise yourself that. And I'm sure everyone on this, all 1,200 of you watching this and the repeats as well, can most likely do 60 seconds of exercise or even 60 seconds of meditation every single day if you stick to it. You'll probably get to the point where you're like, I don't want to do 60 seconds. I'll do 2 minutes, or I'll do 3 minutes. But as long as you get that 60 seconds in for a week, your habits will soar and they will go up to a reasonable level rather than starting off high and then falling off. And there's a lot of behavior change science about that as well. So start really low, but aim for consistency. That's what tends to work with patients that I see.
I'm grateful for you for sharing the fact that you're as fallible as the rest of us in terms of bad habits. I think that's encouraging to hear, because we all struggle in that way. But just to help you feel better about that, Shelley has put in the chat, Rupy's eyes look so clear and bright. He looks so healthy, a great role model for medical practitioners. So you're obviously helping to restore your vitality. On that note, what are some of the things that you do personally? You've sort of hinted at meditation and some of your other practices. Are there any things that are part of your daily routine that you find really help you sort of stay vibrant, not just in food terms, but in terms of overall habits?
Yeah, so I have a mantra that I essentially practice every morning, and I've been sharing that actually on my social media accounts as I've been giving myself a bit of a health kick over the last couple of weeks, and it's wake, water, meditate. So I wake up in the morning. I tend to wake up pretty early at about 6 a.m. I'm trying to get it even earlier, but it also depends on the quality of my sleep. The first thing I do is water. I have my water. And the next thing I do is meditate. And I meditate in an environment where I haven't looked at my phone, and I tend not to look at my phone for the first 2 hours of my day that I'm quite rigid on. And I meditate for at least 10 minutes. I'm trying to push that to 12 now. but I know I can achieve 10 minutes because I started off really, really low, like I said, 60 seconds. And I tend to then go into my exercise routine, and I annotate my exercise routine according to how I've slept and the quality of my sleep the night before. I've been experimenting with a sleep tracking app, something called Aura. Don't have any affiliation with them, but loads of other sleep tracking apps that you can get for free. And if I've had a really good quality sleep, I'll do quite an intense exercise like HIIT training. If I haven't, then I'll probably end up doing something like yoga or flow, something a lot more lower intensity, just so I get my movement in, but I'm not overdoing it, because it can be actually detrimental and counterproductive if you try and push yourself too hard. So those are the key sort of habits that I do in the morning. And one of the other things, I haven't really shared it as much, but I tend to write an affirmation in the morning with my non-dominant hand, which is my left hand. And that affirmation is something very simple. It's "you will achieve everything." And I try and write that every single day with my non-dominant hand. The reason why I do it with my non-dominant hand is because you have to put a lot more effort into writing a sentence that isn't just a scribble if you're doing it with your non-dominant hands. And that forces me to focus on the words that I'm actually writing. And I do that every single day to just focus on what I'm visualizing of my future to be and what I want to try and achieve.
That's great, Rupy. Thank you. That's really inspiring. Now, when we had a chat the other day, you also mentioned that you, like me, I think you're someone who tries to practice gratitude in your daily life, but also that you try and set a vision for what you might do as well. So sort of you've explained your start of day routine beautifully there. Do you want to say a bit more about that? I can't remember exactly how you described it, but you talked about sort of setting some kind of vision or purpose, which I found really inspiring. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I think gratitude is like the ultimate currency these days, because it really does refocus on what's actually super important. I think no more than ever has gratitude been ever more important in today's day and age. So I try and practice gratitude every single day. I actually shared it on my social media account for over 2 years. Every single day I would post 3 things that I'm grateful for, and it can be as simple as the cashier smiling at me, or something quite major like, I made my first TV appearance, or I'm sure Action for Happiness, when I did the talk in that amazing hall, was one of the things I was grateful for as well. But when it comes to visualization, I've been reading quite a few books on this, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Tara Swart on my podcast recently, who's a neuroscientist and teaches at MIT and also business school. And she's a firm believer, and also quite an evidence-based practitioner, and she's a medic as well, in the power of visualization and the laws of attraction. If you can crystallize exactly what you want to achieve, whether that be, for me, it's building currently a tech company that has the capacity to improve everyone's eating habits on every daily basis by essentially matching their nutritional goals to their recipes and their shopping using a digital platform. If you can crystallize exactly what that feels like, what that looks like, what it is to be in that position if you are running a company, or whether you're being the best dad, or whether you are, making improvements of your job, or you found the vocation that you actually want to do, really visualize and hold on to that feeling, and try and paint that beautiful, really, really specific picture in your mind. And subconsciously, those things will manifest in your life. And it sounds quite unusual to say that, particularly as, I'm an evidence-based doctor, but these things actually do happen. And there is a lot of science behind that. And it actually crosses the realm from, it leaves quantum to one side and actually goes into cognitive neuroscience. There are things that we can actually do by just focusing on what we want to achieve. And I
so
think
on that note, Rupy, so obviously that's about sort of setting an intention, if you like, and really kind of visualizing something that's important to you. As you know, we love to make these sessions interactive for the audience. We're encouraging people to take action. So maybe we could pause before we turn to all these amazing questions people have been posting on such a range of topics. Really grateful for all the feedback. Let's just do this as an audience, shall we? So, I think probably what most people would like to do leaving here today is to have something concrete they might go away with as an action, or something they'd like to work towards when it comes to their overall well-being. It may be about their eating habits, it may be about their sleep, it might be about one of the other great suggestions you've made. How would you encourage the audience to think about sort of bringing something like that into their mind now in a concrete way, and then perhaps we could ask people to share what comes up for them in the chat. Do you want to just sort of guide us through how you approach that?
Yeah, I would love that actually. I think that's really good, and we can share sort of like maybe a few people if we want to share what they want to achieve. That'd be great. I mean, for me, I like to think of in 5 years' time, waking up, where am I geographically, what the temperature is, what the light is, who I'm with, what my body feels like. Am I pain free? Am I energetic? Do I feel vibrant? What does my skin feel like? What is my head like? You know, all these different attributes. And what is my morning routine like? Am I still doing what I'm doing right now? Have I made any improvements on that? And also making, like, instead of zooming into the minutiae of what it is, what's the macro level of, like, where am I working? Am I going to work? Am I staying at home to work? Am I going to a hospital or a clinic or a surgery? What am I doing? And those things, and really trying to conjure up exactly what I want to achieve. For other people, it can be really different. It could be, you know, I wake up and I see my child, or, you know, I'm taking my child to school, I'm homeschooling, or I'm taking them to a lake or a beauty spot, or we're doing a holiday. You know, all those different things. Just focus on what you want to achieve. And also, if you wanted to tag that or hook that to a healthy habit that you've been practicing for in the future, a year, what does that feel like? Are you jogging for an hour every single day, or are you rowing, or are you sleeping for 8 hours? What does that feel like? So yeah, I think those are things that we could focus on. I'd love to hear what people want, and maybe I can help as well.
Great. Well, let's do that now, folks. So if you'd like to visualize something that's really important to you, somewhere you'd like to be in your life, and particularly if you can articulate an action that's going to help you get there, that whole line that says that every big journey begins with one small step, and Rupy's point about start small, start somewhere. So what are you going to do as a result of what we've been talking about today? You know, and there's people talking about, I'd like to have a good night's sleep. I want to come off my medication. I want to help make a difference as a health worker. I want to be super healthy. I want to like myself more. I want to laugh more and be silly, help balance my hormones, change my relationship to food. So, you know, these are fantastic and very much in line with what you've just described. So what we'll do, folks, after this this session is share the chat actually with the whole community via the email, but also with you, Rupy. So if there are things that you want to follow up on, or indeed if people want to get in touch, we'll have a follow-up email where they can sort of get in touch and pursue some of these things. But we've had so many great questions. I want to leave time for that. So let me turn to some of the things from the audience. And Victoria has said, are there any tips for kids' nutrition? It's really hard to get kids to eat more veggies and not eat junk food. I mean, that's true of adults too, but particularly as a father of young children, I know that feeling. What would you suggest?
Oh, there's so many times I'm asked that question in clinic as well. I was just in pediatrics on Monday and was dealing with some fussy eaters. I would say there's a few things I would say, particularly with young children. If they are rejecting of a certain food when they're age 2, 3, 4, don't think that they're going to reject that food for the rest of their life. Our taste buds evolve as much as our brain evolves as well. Our brain is evolving until our 20s. So don't be disheartened, and always come back with the same sort of food time and time again, you know, in a different sort of format, whether it be puree, whether it be roasted, whether it be steamed. The other thing I would try and find out is what their flavors are like. What kind of flavors do they like? Is it salty, umami? What can you peg the flavors that they really enjoy to sort of a healthier item? So I always find nuts and seeds are fantastic, and getting them involved in the process of making those snacks as well themselves are absolutely wonderful. Another thing is sneak it into their diet. So I've got this parsnip shepherd's pie recipe, and for those of you who are outside of the UK, you might not know what a shepherd's pie is, but it's basically the original was minced bit of tomatoes, some peas, and then some mashed potato on top, and then just you bake it. It's very delicious. It's very heavy. My version is with lentils, onions, some delicious balsamic vinegar to give that little bit of sourness, and chopped tomatoes. And then I actually make the top with parsnip mash. And the number of parents that I've been contacted afterwards and saying that recipe was amazing, my kids love it, and I had no idea they were eating lentils and vegetables and stuff. I think finding a strategy of trying foods that they get involved in the process of making, they will enjoy it a lot more.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Very helpful advice. Just wanted to pick up on still loads of lovely stuff coming in on the chat. One that's getting lots of kudos from other people. Andy said, after serious illness, I decided to exercise every day for 100 days. Today is day 277. And today I started a new 100-day project to spend 100 days decluttering a bit each day. So, I mean, that's obviously a model that's working great there, and lots of people are appreciating that. Let's turn to something that my colleague Alex, who you met, and I were discussing the other day, which is about pleasure eating. Why we sort of treat ourselves and how that can sometimes be associated with unhealthy choices and what's going on there. But Judy's also asked in the questions, hi Mark, could you please ask, why do we turn to sweet things when we're worried, even when we know it's bad for us?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and one that I think plagues us all, particularly when we know, rationally speaking, that we shouldn't be having these foods. And it's purely neurological. We crave the foods that will give us a dopamine hit. And if you've ever seen functional MRIs of people eating food that is high sugar, high salt, you'll see those areas in the brain where dopamine is released just light up like a Christmas tree. So it's no wonder that those kind of foods, the things that we crave when we know that we should be eating something else. That's why I think your food environment, one that you can control, is super important. So that's why at home, I don't keep any junk food or things that I know that I will slip up. And I know that, at work, and that's why I was saying earlier when I put on a lot of weight this year, at work I can't control that. And I know I can't control myself either. And so if there's jellies and sweets and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to be eating it, even though I know that's very wrong for me. So I think controlling your food environment is very important, but there is an evolutionary drive towards those foods that we know light up our dopamine pathways. And that's why sugar can be, in a way, addictive.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of anxiety and sort of mental health challenges at the moment anyway, but also particularly in terms of the situation we're in as a global community. Sue's asked a really important question. Hi, I'm suffering from anxiety and depression. I'm constantly tired and tense and feel sick most of the time. Could you please recommend some changes I could make? Now, obviously, it's very personalized and you don't know the specifics, but are there some general tips around that?
Yeah, I would say, so many people have those sorts of symptoms, so you're not alone, first of all. I would say always try and find someone that's going to be your partner, someone that you can rely on, someone you can offload to, someone you can actually confide in with all the symptoms, and also write down your symptoms as well, and always speak to your practitioner to make sure that there's nothing underlying going on. I would say you really need to focus on the basics. And one of the best things I've found is honestly focusing on sleep and focusing on making sure that you're getting enough rest in. And then adding on those health habits that we talked about, gradually introducing healthier foods if you're not already on a healthier diet, and being able to master certain foods and recipes that you can make within 10, 15 minutes. Because if you're already feeling weak and already feeling tired, it's going to be very, very hard for you to cook a number of different dishes at the same time, meal prep, make sure, it's a lot of anxiety. So go easy on yourself, be compassionate with yourself, and do one thing at a time, and just make sure you're mastering a recipe and that you can rely on.
That's so powerful. Thank you. And one of the things that always inspires me is how many more people right now in the midst of these kind of mental health challenges are just saying, it's okay to not be okay. Being able to do the brave thing like she's just done there, which is to sort of acknowledge what's going on and say, this is part of the human condition. This is something we all experience at times, and we all have difficult days. As you acknowledge, you as a health expert are still making poor health choices in a difficult situation, and all of us, even me, trying to run a charity focused on well-being, I have my days of darkness and anxiety as well. So thank you for that. There's been quite a lot of chat about your comments on time restricted eating, and also particularly on stopping eating before bed as one of those tips around sleep. What is eating too late? How many hours ideally before sleep? Stephanie's asking here, how many hours before sleep should we stop eating?
I would say a general rule of thumb is 2 to 3 hours before. And that generally is a good way of allowing your gut to rest before going to bed. And also running a few experiments on yourself. So I know through tracking my sleep for a little while that if I eat an hour before bed, that still has a detrimental impact on the quality of my sleep and the number of sleep rhythms I get. So I find a nice window of time is a minimum of 2, if not 3.
Great. Hannah's asked a really important question, I think, sort of slightly broader in scope, around our sort of general messaging around health and nutrition. She says, Rupy, I'm interested to know how your approach to nutrition sits within the NHS, which seems to be lagging behind in terms of the information it offers around diet. For example, you were talking about the healthy fats and how important those were, but low fat is still very much promoted on the NHS websites. So Hannah would love to know your thoughts on this and whether you consider that things are beginning to change towards perhaps more of this rounded approach to promoting good health that you're focused on.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Hannah, and one that unfortunately plagues nutritional science. There's a number of reasons as to why the NHS and other healthcare systems across the world are quite slow to adopt these. There's deeply ingrained beliefs. It's almost like quite ideological about nutrition as a science. The type of science that we are able to perform with the gold standard being randomized controlled trials is lacking because there's lack of funds. There's no big broccoli trying to encourage, people to eat a certain dietary pattern with broccoli to see what the impact there is on a number of different disease states. And the other thing is that we're wedded to this paradigm of calories in, calories out, which pragmatically speaking is really, really poor. It's not held in good science. It's something that's over 100 years old. I'm not a calorie denier. I don't disagree that calories exist, but to give people the false reassurance that as long as you control calories to this arbitrary measure of 2,000 for women and 2,500 for men, and you'll be fine in terms of your weight control and stave off type 2 diabetes, is just a fallacy. So gradually we are making baby steps towards clinicians who are not trained in nutrition, I must say, and this is something that we're trying to rectify with culinary medicine. Gradually we are making progress towards them having a more holistic attitude to the quality of food you put in, rather than energy and other arbitrary measures, including macronutrient measures alone, because that enough is just not a lot. You need to look at the holistic aspects of food. And I think, the kind of work that I'm doing with the Doctor's Kitchen and culinary medicine, and a lot more people just generally being interested in this subject, is really proving that, to paving the way for change.
Yeah, and I think you're fighting a big battle against marketing messaging, which is unhelpful. I mean, it's in the interest of big food companies and purveyors of mass products to say that 100 calories from a fizzy sugary drink is the same as 100 calories of avocado or nuts. But yeah. I think, as you've shown, that's just completely not the case. There are these other hormonal and sort of effects around, hunger levels and wider nutritional benefits and so on, that are just much more complicated than just that. On this subject of eating and our approach to eating, Mal's asked, I think, what's a very common challenge. What advice would you give to a person who struggles with binge eating or emotional eating?
I think, again, another really, really important topic. The first thing I would say is you need to get help, and you need to get an advocate for yourself, someone who is a registered nutritionist or a registered dietitian who has training in this, because everyone's experience of binge eating and eating disorders is different, and there are different root causes as to why people do so. And there's a huge spectrum of binge eating, all these different eating disorders that we lump in together. Someone's severity might be all over here, which is really, really severe to the point where they actually need admission into hospitals. Other people's can be controlled with some cognitive behavioral therapy and some slight tweaks to their diet. So I would say you need to make sure that you have an advocate for yourself, and you see someone who's specialized in these sorts of disordered eating states, and can give you the right personalized advice. And just to give you an example of what that would involve as a process, it would be a food diary, timings of when you actually have the episodes, when you binge eat or even purge as well, if that's one of the symptoms that you might have, and also how long this has been going on for as well, and what the triggers are for that. It's really important to get a hold of that, and it's not something that people can say, if you just do this or you just follow this diet, it will go away. No, it's very, very individual, and get to the root cause.
When we were together in London, we did a big event on particularly on mental health and nutrition. And you've already covered that a lot in what you've said, and it's a great passion of our work. One of the studies that was done was sort of showing that, broadly speaking, a Mediterranean style diet can bring quite big benefits for our mental well-being. And there's a question here from Yash, which I think is really interesting. If there's one thing you could include in your diet or eat every day for mental well-being, what would that be?
So one ingredient or one aspect?
I think either, whichever it seems most relevant to you.
So I would say I wouldn't choose a single ingredient. I would include a category, and that category would undoubtedly be fiber. The reasons are multiple fold. So we know that we generally don't have enough fiber in our diets, and we tend to not have enough diversity in our diet as well, because fiber isn't just a universal thing. It's not just a uniform, I'm going to have fiber in my diet. There are hundreds of different types of fibers, and the aim of the game is to try and get diversity. The way we get diversity of fibers is getting a variety of different nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, pulses, those sorts of elements in that diet. But if you don't eat those ingredients, it's the stalks of cauliflower or tender stem broccoli, or even root vegetables like parsnips with the skins on. These all have different types of fibers. Why I say fiber is because of the things that we talked about. So production of neurotransmitters, improvement in sugar control, maintenance of the gut barrier, but also inflammation control. So we used to think that our brains were completely immunodistinct, i.e. they weren't penetrable by pathogens or inflammatory molecules crossing from our systemic bodies into the brain. We now know that's incorrect. There's been some incredible research looking at just how inflamed bodies can cause an inflamed mind, and why brain inflammation, I know it sounds very scary, but it can be quite insidious and mild, can lead to depressive symptoms. So one of the best strategies I find with improving inflammation, something that is a very important process in our body, it's evolutionarily one of the most important processes that we need to have, but balancing the excess of inflammation, which is associated with Western lifestyles, is by improving gut health. And we can do that by making sure that we get really good different types of fibers in our diet. And that's one of the core pillars of the Mediterranean diet.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about alcohol briefly. So about sort of 14 months ago, I realized that my love and passion for craft beers had got a little bit out of hand, and I started a sort of like a period of not drinking, and actually have kept that up going on now for like 14 months. Haven't had any alcohol for 14 months, and I've found that empowering and healthful generally. A couple of interesting questions on a similar line, really. So Jackie D has asked, can you talk a bit about the effects of alcohol on the body and mind? What might be the best recommended amount so we don't get the detrimental effects? And then Sophie sounds like she's been on a journey similar to mine. She said, I gave up alcohol a year ago, haven't noticed any massive changes to the way I feel, but could Rupy tell me a bit about what some of the benefits are going on inside my body so I can feel some sense of achievement and motivation to carry on?
Sure, yeah. So alcohol is a tricky topic because I like drinking alcohol. I like the taste of it. I like the mild, pleasurable effects of obviously not complete intoxication, but mild intoxication. So really it comes to, and I certainly was drinking a lot more during lockdown as well. I'm very, very happy to admit that, you know, I was perhaps drinking 1 to 2 glasses every other day, or if not every day. And that cumulative effect was probably having an impact on my weight gain as well, because alcohol is full of calories, particularly wine and beer. So really it comes down to measuring the pleasure effects of having a small amount of alcohol versus the potential hepatotoxic effects, so the impacts on the liver, and the increase in energy intake, as well as, I know we're just talking about calories and stuff, but this is really something that is quite sugary and actually causes some detrimental impacts, particularly on increasing adipose tissue as well. So balancing the mental health effects. In excess, undoubtedly, alcohol is a depressant. And I would always say that, you know, anyone who suffers from anxiety, low mood, or has mood disorders, you know, alcohol is probably not a good long-term strategy. And I would say, rather than just going cold turkey straight away, it's something you might want to reduce gradually. It's a drug. It is, you know, it exhibits withdrawal and tolerance effects, even those who are mildly impacted by it. The other thing is, you know, there are some potential benefits of having a bit of alcohol in your system, but the amount of alcohol is really, really small. It's less than half a glass of wine every other day, which most people probably wouldn't recently have. You'd always have like a bit more than that, or you'd have a little bit of a top up. So it's quite hard to dose out the alcohol according to people. But the mild impacts on paradoxically improving anxiety can actually be something that people want to consider with alcohol. I'm actually going through a period like yourself, Mark, where I'm removing alcohol from my diet entirely and just looking at the effects of it. And actually, I really enjoy not having alcohol in my system now, despite me really craving, a good red wine every now and then. I'm actually enjoying the sort of discipline of not having it and actually being completely sober at a dinner, or not having any intoxicating effects at all. So it's one that's very, very individual again.
It's personal, isn't it? But that's very helpful. Thank you. Now, you've talked about meditation and mindfulness a little bit as a practice. We had a wonderful webinar with Andy Puddicombe from Headspace just last week. I quite like this idea of where mindfulness meets food and our daily choices, and this idea of mindful eating. So Chrissy has said, I'd love to hear your tips on how to eat more mindfully. And I think there's something interesting in this idea of just being really conscious rather than sort of on autopilot when we make our choices around food and lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and something I like to play a little game with myself when I'm working in hospital. It's to when I'm having a break and I'm having my lunch or dinner, depending on what shift I'm doing, I just look around the staff room and I just count how many people are eating with one hand and looking at their phone with another, or eating and looking into a laptop screen. And it's astounding how many people do it. And you walk around, when we used to be able to walk around the city, the number of office workers doing exactly the same thing. We're constantly consuming information at the same time we're consuming food. And the two can't go hand in hand together, because you won't recognize your satiety signals. We're constantly being distracted with our brains. We're trying to digest food at the same time. Your brain is a very energy intensive organ. It will take a lot of glucose away, and so you're diverting blood towards it. And also your gut during the process of digestion is also requiring the same blood flow as well for the process of digesting your food. So when you think about it pragmatically, all intuitive eating is slowing down the process of consuming food and being a lot more in tune with the flavors, the textures, and the amount of food that you're eating. I'm making it very, very basic as a foundation, because I think we tend to forget the basics. And when it comes to mindful eating, yes, there's a whole number of practices where you can smell the food, you can wait, you can chew at least 10, 15 times, all these kind of rules around it. But when you strip it back, it's literally just removing the distractions and giving your focus to the food, and also having a conversation with another human being actually naturally slows down the eating process as well, which I think is probably one of the best ways of enjoying food too.
And one of the things I love most about the lockdown challenging time was just more chance to eat with my wife and kids and just be together for conversation. Rupy, this has been fantastic. We're running out of time, or out of time really, but I wanted to ask you one final thing. I've noticed in your fantastic Doctor's Kitchen podcast that you've been talking about some really broad themes. And one of these ideas that I know is on your mind as well as ours is, what do we want to see in a world as we rebuild post-COVID and try and make a better world? What does a post-COVID world look like from your perspective? What should we be pushing for and dreaming of in terms of well-being and lifestyle?
Yeah, I've really had a lot of fun actually inviting varied guests over the last couple of months to join in the conversation. And rather than just focusing on COVID, the virus, how to support your immune system, all the different foods you should be eating, yada, yada, I really thought that this is an opportunity to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and actually try and look at the opportunities of what kind of landscape, what kind of world do we want to create looking forward in 5 years time or 10 years time, just like the visualization that we were doing. So I had conversations with George Monbiot, with Professor Guy Standing, who's a big proponent of universal basic income. And I feel that what was eventually going to happen with automation and machines taking over a lot of jobs at an incredible pace is almost been accelerated by what we're seeing right now. We're being told to stay at home. We have to order things from online retailers, everything comes to us, people are out of jobs. So how do we maintain a structured society where people can still thrive when it comes to healthy eating, lifestyle, and also sense of purpose? And if you don't know what universal basic income is, I would highly recommend you listen to that podcast that I did with Professor Guy Standing. It's really a base income that allows people to be fully secure financially. And if you think about it, just every night, if there were no insecurities around finances, how much time and energy could we put into things that we love? Like Mark, you're doing incredible things with your nonprofit. Think about the other things that people could also put their energy in, things that where passion meets opportunity. I can really see the opportunities of a healthful, thriving society in a post-pandemic world. And I think now we really need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and seeing where that takes us, and we can vote that in.
That's very inspiring, and that's certainly the world that we're trying to work towards. We're so grateful for you sparing this time this evening, Rupy. Maybe you could leave us with just one final sentence or thought about what we can do individually to help live a healthier and happier life. What would be your parting recommendation?
I would say get comfortable in the kitchen, be exploratory in the kitchen, learn a new recipe every single week, try and get used to those principles of healthy eating that I discussed earlier. And also have a lot more compassion for yourselves and practice self-love, and share a meal, whether it's with your family or friends. Share a meal at least once a week. Honestly, it can be really life-changing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And a huge thank you to everyone for being here. Thousands of people, amazing supportive comments in the chat, lovely questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of them. Rupy, very grateful. Keep up the fantastic work and hopefully see you again really soon. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.